Assurant. I'm just giving another minute for some other participants to come in, and then we will get started. All right, I have about a minute after, so I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. Welcome, Assurant folks. Thank you for joining us today. The Georgia Engagement Champion Team and Trees Atlanta have brought us another great opportunity to spend some time together and to learn about native plants. I'm not going to steal anybody's thunder and let them introduce more about the topic, but I do want to also remind everyone who's participating today that we are planning for another in-person volunteer workday on November 4th, and that will be to support Plant Atlanta. We hope that you'll consider joining us for this volunteer workday event, and more information will be coming out on it. In the meantime, though, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mike Vinicaria, who is the Business Development Director for Trees.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I am simply here to say thank you to all of the Assurant folks out there. You guys have been significant supporters of Trees Atlanta since 2017. Since that time, Assurant Foundation has donated over $125,000 to Trees Atlanta, and several of you have donations coming out of your paychecks every month coming to us. Additionally, you've been involved in a number of projects with us, planting trees, restoring forests around Atlanta. And also, we're very involved with this during COVID when we couldn't get together in person. We hosted a series of these webinars, educational opportunities that a number of you attended. So I just want to say thank you very much. We look forward to continuing our partnership. And with that, I want to turn it over to Reed Manderfield, who is with our education team. Reed?
Hi, thank you so much. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. My name is Reed Manderfield, and I am the education intern at Trees Atlanta. And if you aren't familiar with Trees Atlanta, our mission is to protect and improve Atlanta's urban forest by planting, conserving, and educating. So today we have a talk about native plants. If you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window or type them in the chat feature, and we'll get to your questions at the end. At the end of the event, you're going to see a survey pop up. We'd really appreciate it if you guys filled that out. It helps us improve your experience for future events. And if you aren't already, please sign up for one of our newsletters. We have volunteer and education newsletters. And then we also have some social media that you guys can stay up to date with our events. And on Saturday, October 8th at the Carter Center, we will be having our annual tree sale, focusing on dry upland species that adapt to climate change and drought tolerant. And one more exciting bit of news, we are going to be moving to the west side of the BeltLine, and our new address is going to be 825 Warner Street, Atlanta. That's going to be near the end of November. And then with that, I am going to pass it off to Grace. She is going to be talking about our native plants today, and she is our BeltLine Arboretum Manager.
Hello. Figure out how to share my screen. There we go. Okay. So welcome. Today we're going to be talking about native plants. And I know some of you guys are maybe not joining from the Atlanta area, so we're going to sort of talk about the United States as a whole a little bit and not get too specific so that it won't be annoying if you don't know what we're talking about because you don't live in Atlanta. What we're going to talk about today is what a native plant is, because if we're going to be talking about native plants, it's important to know what native plants are. The difference between native plants and non-native plants and invasive plants, ways to identify plants, and then how to determine their native range so you can then find out if they're native, non-native, or invasive. Why invasives are harmful to the environment, and the benefits of native plants and the importance of biodiversity. So first off, what is a native plant? A native plant is a plant that has been, we usually use before European settlement for the United States. So these plants have been here since before European settlement and have developed over hundreds or thousands of years in a particular region or ecosystem. So you can have different layers of native plants where you can have plants that are native to the United States, but you can also have plants that are native to Georgia or to the Piedmont region of Georgia. So it can get really like niche-y and like very specific, or you can be a little bit broader. So I'm going to talk a little bit broader today so that we're not being irrelevant for anyone. A non-native plant is going to be a plant that's introduced to a new area or ecosystem. Either people intentionally have planted it there or it came over accidentally. So if you bought a plant and it like has a seed gets stuck there, or you just don't know that you're introducing a plant because you were somewhere else and it has come with you, or you can also introduce a plant by a lot of plants that are commonly ornamental landscape plants are intentionally brought here because people think they're beautiful, and a lot of them are, and they plant them in their yard intentionally. And naturalized plants are going to be plants that are not native, that don't need help reproducing and maintaining themselves. So that would be like, instead of planting one plant, it can spread. And then an invasive plant is going to be a plant that can spread and is unruly and causes harm to the ecosystem. So frequently people think that a lot of plants that if they grow really quickly or they spread really easily are going to be invasive plants. That's only the case if they're not native. If you have a native plant and it is a little unruly and just like very good at growing, that's what we refer to as an opportunistic native. So that's going to be a native plant that sort of takes advantage of disturbance or existing like vegetation to spread and outcompete the other things that are there. Continuing. In order to figure out if you're looking at a native or non-native plant, you would need to identify said plant. Don't panic. This is kind of like a very deep view, but sort of just like if you take a step back, it's easy to look at like when you're looking at a plant, think about what the floral arrangement might be. If it has a flower, that's great. That'll be very helpful for your identification. But that's not always the case. But if you're looking at your plant and it has multiple flowers and it's along the edge of the stem, or you just have one giant flower at the top of the stem, just starts helping you think about like the differences between that and another plant that you might be looking at. Leaf arrangement is also something that's important. So you can have leaves that are opposite of each other. So you can see, I actually don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but if you can, I hope you can. Anyways.
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Then when I point to things, okay, perfect. Thank you. They'll be opposite of each other. So that's sort of like if you held a mirror, they have perfect symmetry down the center. They're right across from each other. You have alternate leaves. So they sort of alternate up and down the stem, and there are whorled leaves. So that will be two or more than, it's almost like opposite leaves, but with additional leaves on the ends. So you have a bunch of them coming out of one node. And then some plants don't really have like a tall stem, and they're kind of more ground dweller, and they have this basal rosette at the bottom. So you'll just want to see like, oh, are all of the leaves sort of down at the bottom and they just shoot up one tall thing? Or is it tall and it has a bunch of leaves around it? Are they opposite of each other? Are they alternate of each other? And then you want to look at the leaves. So there's a lot of different leaf shapes you could have, which can help with your identification as well as are the sides of the leaves wavy, or are they spiky, or are they really, really loby? You want to look at the tops of the leaves, and the bottom of the leaves also will have different shapes. Definitely don't need to memorize this to like start sort of thinking about it. It's just something you want to sort of have in the back of your mind when you're looking at something. I definitely don't have all of this memorized, so definitely not necessary. But after you look at it and are sort of looking at the different characteristics, you might want to identify it. I'm going to talk about iNaturalist because it's my favorite, but there are many other identification apps or like websites, etc. iNaturalist's vision is to create a world where everyone can understand and sustain biodiversity through the practice of observing wild organisms and sharing information about them. Their mission is to build a global community of 100 million naturalists by 2030, and in order to connect people to nature and advance biodiversity science and conservation. But in general, what I like to think of it as is sort of like a very large social media platform for people who are interested in learning about different organisms and people who know a lot about different organisms spreading their knowledge. So it's like, I find it to be a very fun place, and I love when people identify my things because I don't know everything, obviously. But also it's really great because it'll do plants, it'll do animals, it'll do mushrooms. It can do everything. So it's very exciting. What it'll also do, I kind of show you here, is it'll prompt you with it, but you don't have to post. It doesn't have to ID it for you. Someone else can go in and ID it for you, which I find very helpful as well. But anyways, if you were to use iNaturalist, I also have this little QR code at the bottom, which will bring you to their website on how to use it, which is a little bit more in depth than I'm going to get with it right now. But you'll need to make an account, and then you'll be posting what you saw, where you saw it, when you saw it, and then a photo of what you saw so people can ID it. Hang on. So this is where, when you're posting photos, you might want to think about the plant characteristics. So you can post multiple photos. So if it is in bloom, you know, one photo of the flower, one of the leaves, one of the leaf arrangements. If it's like a very hairy stem, you might want to post a photo that kind of shows that. Just some different characteristics which would help someone look at it and ID it for you. And then once you have found what your plant is, you can visit the USDA plant database. And what you can do is then search the name in there, and it'll pull up a range map. So this is two different examples of hollies. The left is American holly, so you can see it is green. There's a little key at the bottom. It's green, so it's native in these green states. But if you find you are looking at an American holly, it'll show you it's introduced in these other blue states. What's also important to note is that a lot of data isn't always up to date and correct. So it can be helpful where Chinese holly, which is the one on the right over here that's introduced, is found in Georgia, but it doesn't show up on the map. So sometimes it's helpful to look at your neighboring states. And if it's found there, there's a likelihood it's found or will be soon found in your state as well. We can also look at the National Association of Invasive Plant Councils. So this is sort of, instead of finding your plant and then looking it up, you can go the other way as well, where they have a few different chapters. So I'm going to use Georgia as an example, since that's where I am, and I'm assuming the majority of you are. So what you'll do is click on sort of the Southeast area, and it'll pull up the Southeast Exotic Plant Council. And then you can see your state chapters of that subsection. So I would click on Georgia. And then you can look over here with some general information about the ones on Georgia. And then you can click on a plant list, and it'll bring up a list of not all of the invasives, but the largely invasive plants that are present in the state of Georgia. So they come in different categories. So there's category 1 alert, category 2, category 3, and category 4. Category 1 is going to be your like most serious offenders. So for example, in Georgia, that would be like kudzu, found all over the plant that ate the South. Definitely a big spreader. Category 1 alert is going to be something that is not yet a problem in this state, but it has potential to become a serious problem. Category 2 is going to be, it's kind of a problem, not sure if it's going to be really bad yet, but it's not as bad as category 1. And then category 3 is going to be a minor problem, or it's not really known if it's going to be a problem yet, but it is a problem in other states that are nearby. So kind of like yellow light there. And then category 4 is going to be a plant that's naturalized in the state, but doesn't pose a problem for the natural areas. It's also, like I was saying before, important to note that even if a plant isn't on one of these lists, it's not always up to date. So you might want to check your neighboring states to see, hey, this was like a category 1 in the neighboring state. It's a good chance that it's probably coming over, or it's a category 3. So like, you might want to watch out. So we've been talking a lot about invasive plants. So why are they harmful? That would be important to note. So there are invasives that can affect every layer of the forest ecosystem. So all the way from the ground layer up through different layers of the forest. So if you think about like your little ground plants, your shrubs, your trees, even like vines. A good example of this is this picture on the right is kudzu. You can kind of see that it has covered the entire floor. They've pulled out a little bit of it so they can get towards it. But the ground is covered, the shrub layer is covered. You can see it coming up into the smaller trees in the back, and you can see it all the way up here to climbing up this large canopy tree. So what it'll end up doing is shading out those plants that are in the bottom layer, and then as it slowly engulfs the larger trees, it'll actually pull the trees down and kill them. So when left unchecked, we end up without as many forests as we have or would have had if these invasive plants were not brought in. It also reduces biodiversity because once again, it's out competing all of the other plants that are in the forest. And then, so we have a lot of efforts such as our forest restoration program, which goes in and does restoration. So what they do is they remove these invasive species and replant native species, which will increase the biodiversity, which will really support a lot of different species. So how do we get these invasive plants here? Like we were talking about before, you can have deliberate introduction and accidental introduction. Most of our introduction is deliberate introduction because we have a lot of those ornamental plants that are sold at a lot of big box stores and are not, people don't typically know. So how are you to know you're putting an invasive in when it's not stated? Those are typically ones that grow quickly too. So it's very easy for nurseries to grow them because they're hardy and they grow nice and big and large, and then they can sell a lot more of them. And then there's also accidental introduction. So a lot of Western states actually have a lot of accidental introduction that came in as seed contaminants. Which brings us to how do plants spread? So these are ways just plants in general can spread, but I also have some examples of these as invasives. They can be dispersed by wildlife. So you can see these cedar waxwings over here, the birds eating the berries on a privet. What they'll do is they'll eat them and then they'll fly away and poop out the seeds into whenever they're sitting in a tree branch. And then there you go, you got privet in your forests. Below that is a dog that walked through a plant with some hitchhiker seeds. So some plants have seeds that will actually stick to you. And then when you move farther away, they'll sort of fall off and then establish themselves there. Wind dispersed is a big one. So this is a dandelion. You can see the seeds blowing away in the wind. And this bottom left corner is Japanese stilt grass, which spreads through water. So a lot of floodplain areas have this issue where the plant is growing and then a large rain event will happen and it'll actually wash all the seeds away into a new area where the water ends up soaking into the ground, and then you have more stuff there. And a lot of plants also will do a combination of these. So after we talked about why invasives are bad, why do we care about natives? Native plants have developed their relationships with other native species over thousands of years. So if you think about yourself as a plant evolving, you don't want to be eaten. So you will end up choosing one way or another to put up a defense. And then if you're an insect and you're trying to eat a bunch of plants and they're all coming up with all these crazy ways to make you not eat them, you end up focusing your efforts in how can I eat this one plant and get past this defense. So that's how we end up with specialized insects, where they will only eat one specific plant or rely on one plant to complete their life cycle. We also have birds who rely on caterpillars to feed their young. So a lot of fledglings require a lot of caterpillars. They're very protein rich and very fatty and very good for growing baby birds. And Carolina chickadees require a landscape of 70% native plants, which is a study done by Doug Tallamy. He is an entomologist and conservationist at the University of Delaware, and we actually have a great talk on our website that he did for us that is recorded, which I highly recommend. He is a fantastic presenter, and he definitely was my gateway into loving native plants. But the study he did showed that in order for a chickadee to support their entire nest of chickadee fledglings, their little baby chickadees, if the landscape didn't have at least 70% native plants, they weren't able to feed their young and keep all of them alive. So having non-native plants ends up creating a food desert for insects and birds because they have not figured out a way to eat those plants because they haven't been around them for thousands of years to get past their defenses. So the poster child for insect specialization is actually monarchs and milkweed. If you aren't familiar, monarch caterpillars will only eat the leaves of milkweed plants. Milkweed's defense it created is that the leaves, if you rip them, much like its common name, it gets this like milky substance that comes out of it. And it's actually kind of latexy and is very difficult to eat. So other caterpillars will try to eat them. Oh, here we go. What the monarch caterpillar does is it will bite the veins and let the milky sap drain out, and then it'll eat the rest of the leaf. Whereas other caterpillars have not developed this yet, and when they try to eat it, it actually closes their jaw shut and they starve to death, which is pretty gruesome. But this is what a monarch caterpillar ends up as a monarch butterfly. Lovely photo. So the value of native landscapes moves on from just specifically supporting pollinator species, although it is a big one. Ground nesting birds are also very reliant on grasslands and like native landscapes as a whole. If you have just a turf grass lawn, you're mowing it constantly, birds can't nest there. There's no coverage. They're going to get run over with a mower. And these plants have been adapted, so they're very drought tolerant. You don't have to water them, limits the use of pesticides to keep the weeds out, less fossil fuels because you're not mowing, less water because you're not irrigating. And also these species have really deep root systems and actually will hold the soil in place very well and help water filter through it. So you're actually cutting down on erosion and flooding and all those fun things we deal with in the city. But this is now the fun part where we talk about a few native plants. So I'm going to go over a couple of them that are exponentially good and more of generalist plants, or ones that support a large amount of species in general. So the first one we're going to talk about is goldenrod. The picture on the right, all of the maps that will come up are from the same website, and so I'll just go ahead and disclose the key. So the light green is going to be a county in the United States that has definitely, there's a documented instance of encountering this species, or I'm looking at the genus. So there has been a goldenrod spotted in each of these light green ones. And then the darker green ones are just counties that there has been one spotted in the state. So likely all of these places have at least one individual of goldenrod. It's just not complete data. So just when you're looking at it, know that. There's over 120 species of goldenrod. Most of them are native to North America. Because there's 120 species, there's a lot of different diversity in them. So you can kind of tell this one's kind of low growing. This one has like kind of like a claw pattern going on there. And then this one's very full and large at the top. But they all have this characteristic little yellow flower, a little cluster of them all, which is kind of hard to see, but these little like branches are all clusters of tiny little yellow flowers. Goldenrod is really important for monarchs during their migration. They're a late bloomer, so they're actually about to start blooming now. So keep your eyes out when you see those fields of yellow. It's goldenrod. It also provides food for 115 different butterfly and moth species, and 11 different bee species will actually specifically use goldenrod as their food source. So here's a lot of bees on them. And in the winter, the birds will eat their seeds as well. So it's important to leave things dormant up in the winter so that birds can feed on them through the winter and they don't starve to death again. The next one I'm going to talk about is the oaks. So oaks are like the plant to plant if you're planting one plant. There's always over 600 species around the world, and 55 species of those are native to the United States. And oaks will host over 500 species of butterflies and moths. So on your one tree, you could have over 500 species of moths or butterflies, which is just wild for me to think about. They also have a lot of diversity in them with their leaf shape. So these are some of the butterflies and moths you might find on your things. This is the gray hair streak, and this is a polyphemus moth, which is actually very large. Interestingly, you can kind of tell the difference between moths too. If you look at their antenna, they kind of are feather-like, opposed to these are just straight. Here's another moth. You can see its little feather thing. This is the California oak moth. This is the Io moth, which is also beautiful. The Delilah underwing, which is amazing at camouflage, as you can see. And whoop, this is the pale beauty. Sorry, got a little too ahead of myself. Now we're gonna go over my favorite. These are the plums and cherries. The genus is Prunus. There are 30 or more species native to the United States. Although these are not all native, some of the things that are in this genus are your plums and cherries and peaches, almonds, apricots, nectarines, that sort of ordeal. And they support 450 species of butterflies and moths. So we'll look at some of those. This is actually the slide where I nerd out, so bear with me. There are also, obviously, people will eat the fruits, but so do a lot of other species. So black bears will eat them, foxes, chipmunks, and different squirrel species, and raccoons. This is the black cherry. This is one of my favorite trees. I think that it's just so beautiful. And it's also the host for the Eastern tiger swallowtail, which is the state butterfly of Georgia. They're actually dimorphous, which is really cool, which means that the male and female don't look the same. So you can tell whether you're looking at a male or if you're looking at a female. So the females have this fun blue bottom down here, while the males are just fully black. And what's also interesting about the females is they come in 2 different forms. So they can come in either this dark form where they're all black, or they come in this yellow form where they're stripy and yellow, which is very interesting. And also followed by my favorite moth. This is called the Cecropia moth. It is North America's largest moth with a wingspan of up to 7 inches long. So it's a very chunky moth and it's gigantic. And this is what it looks like as a caterpillar, which is also wild. So if you ever see this, I will be very jealous of you. There's also the cedar waxwing, which eats a lot of the berries along with a lot of other birds. And chipmunks will also eat the fruits, which is just so cute. And I talked about iNaturalist before, but these are some other apps you can use. I talked about Doug Tallamy in his lecture that's on our website, but he also has these 3 fantastic books, Nature's Best Hope, Bringing Nature Home, and The Nature of Oaks. Also, sometimes people don't think about it. I'm part of a few Facebook groups that are actually fantastic at identifying plants. Don't sleep on the Facebook groups. It's very helpful. But that's sort of it. Does anyone have any questions?
Hi, Grace. Thank you. We do actually have one question. It's about your slide where you list the categories of the invasive species.
Oh, yep.
The question was, where does wisteria and Chinese climbing fern fall on that category list?
That is a great question. Hold on, I got stuck in my. I know wisteria, I think, is under the category 1. Japanese climbing fern, I want to say might be category 1 in Florida, but I'm not sure if it's up on ours yet. I will look it up really
They're
quick.
also wondering about English ivy.
English ivy. Let me pull up the list of all of them. Okay. I can send a link in the chat in a moment.
While we're thinking about that, could you give us some examples of some native plants that Trees Atlanta has planted along the Beltline?
Yeah, so we have a lot of different species. We do a lot of different native grasses, which are also, I didn't talk about any grasses today, but native grasses are really great. We have a lot of broom sedge. Little bluestem is a really great ornamental that's also native. So it kind of has this like bluish hue to it. Split-beard bluestem is good. One of my favorite is purple top. It has this crazy purplish seed head ordeal. But wildflower wise, we also do a lot of blanket flower, bee balm, which is great for the bees. So many to choose from. Black-eyed Susans, purple coneflower is also great. Yeah, lots of different ones. I think we have over like 45 native species on the trail.
And which one was your favorite? Was it the plums and cherries?
My favorite is actually spotted bee balm. It's a little bit shorter than a lot of the other bee balm we use, but it has these yellow flowers that have these little purple dots on them, and their leaves, when they bloom, turn this like pinkish color. There's multiple layers of beauty.
And do you have any tips on planting fruit trees such as peaches or plums from seeds?
Ooh, from seeds. if I was going to do that, I would buy probably an organic. I guess if you're buying like the fruit and then eating the fruit and then planting the seed, I would probably go with an organic one, just because it's more likely to not have had a lot of different like genetic changes or cloning going on, because a lot of fruit species, when we're eating them, are not in their fully natural state. They've been sort of bred to be good to eat, opposed to how they were beforehand. Sorry, my computer is not loading this list.
That's a good tip. And speaking about the BeltLine and talking about native plants, it's hard not to talk about invasive species. What's the most difficult one to deal with on the BeltLine?
Kudzu is definitely a big problem. It takes about like 4 or 5 years to like fully get rid of it. But since the BeltLine is actually so narrow in what's planted, it comes in from the neighboring properties pretty frequently because it can grow up to a foot a day. So it's always lingering.
Well, if you find the link, we can send that in the follow-up email.
Yeah.
And if there are no more questions, then let's see if there. We do have another question. Is bamboo considered invasive?
There are different types of bamboo. We have invasive bamboos here, but we do have a couple native ones. River cane is the one that's going to be native to sort of like most native to the Piedmont area. So it would depend on what kind you had, but you can get river cane, and it has the same sort of growth type. It just has a lot smaller of it's about this big opposed to like, like a big cane.
All right. Well, if there are no more questions, just a
There's
reminder
actually
that.
one more I see there.
Oh, see. Oh, yes, we did get another one.
2 more.
Yes. Okay, so we have a comment and then a question. So we chop the kudzu vine towards the base and then the vine usually dies. Does this do the job, or do we need to do more?
Well, if it's working for you, I mean, we can do, that sounds fine. Frequently, if we're cutting it back to the ground, we'll use a tiny bit of herbicide, where it'll suck it down into its roots. If we're dealing with a whole field, different story. But if you have just a little bit, it's totally fine to just cut it back as you see fit and not use any herbicide. Or you can do a little bit of stump treatment. Either ways. Okay.
And then is sumac or poison sumac native in the Southeast?
Yes, poison sumac is going to be more of like a wetland, like lower Georgia coastal wetlandish. It's not in the Piedmont area, but actually there are a couple native sumacs, but smooth sumac is one of them, and it's actually the only native tree to all 48 contiguous states, which is my favorite fun fact about it.
Any other questions?
Thank you to the Trees Atlanta team for coming today and speaking with us. Just a reminder again, for those who might have joined a couple minutes late, we will be doing an in-person volunteer workday on November 4th to support Plantlanta. And we hope that you and or your colleagues and family will come out and join us on that day. More information will be forthcoming through Connect and email. So thank you again to everyone who participated, and thank you.